Howdy. Gonna get started in just a moment. Just gonna make sure I'm all set up here. You are gonna have to forgive me because in 11 minutes and 25 seconds, I will have to go take my chicken out of the oven. Thankfully, I live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, so it should be very quick for me to go to the other side of that wall and remove my chicken from the oven. Don't be alarmed if you hear me yell and burn myself. It happens on a regular basis. So just look forward to that moment coming soon. We're going to get started in just a moment. Going to give you some time to settle in, maybe get a snack, because we got a lot to talk about today. And I hope this won't be a long one, but I cannot promise you it won't be a long one, if that makes sense. Gotta get my materials prepared. Oh yeah, and my void of a microphone is back. If you've been missing it, it's still here. Just try to keep it out of frame as much as possible. I feel like I've gone full autumnal. Like I have a flannel, I have like my trick or treat mug. Let me show you. It says trick or treat on the inside. I've got tea. I feel like I've just gone fully autumn vibes. And yet winter will be here before I know it. Anyway, we don't need to think about that. Okay. Okay, so we're going to get started. It's a couple minutes past my start time. Let's go. So if you're new here, you're watching for the first time, hello, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer at the Redress Movement. I do this stream every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I won't be here next week. I will be here the week after. And these are also posted always to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media. Our Instagram handle is here. Our Twitter handle is here. And our email is over here. If you want to talk to somebody because you're interested in the work that we're doing, you can feel free to reach out to hello@redressmovement.org. And then you will probably come in contact with myself or one of my fellow digital organizers. So today, this was one of those topics I was like, this might be like too big for me to even start to cover. But you know what? I'm all about like, let's take this big thing, let's break it down so we can, understand it on, kind of an everyday understanding level. And also it's really closely connected to the work we do at the Redress Movement. So our work at the Redress Movement is focused mostly on restitution for housing segregation, but very closely related to that is affirmative action. And if you've been paying attention to the news coming out of the Supreme Court, it does look like there is an effort maybe to pull back on affirmative action, especially as it pertains to colleges and universities. So I wanted to talk about this because this is a really this is a very contentious debate around affirmative action, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I have a lot of I think it falls into, much like housing segregation, there's a lot of misunderstanding, or I don't want to say myths around it, but the argument can kind of the debate can fall apart because there's not complete context for, hey, but why is one side saying the things as they are? I really hope my street cooperates today because it is hot in my apartment and I'm just really not interested in all the honking. So I have a window open. We'll see how long that lasts. Anyway, so I want to talk about affirmative action. I want to talk about the history of affirmative action and why it exists. Because I also feel that sometimes the argument, even in favor of affirmative action, can fall short because it's missing that historical context. And so I want to provide some of that. Full disclaimer, I am not a scholar of affirmative action. I am not a historian. There is so much here so much here that I am not going to give due justice to and give entirety full context for, but I do want to, and I'll mention this again later in our talk, but I do want to say that if you are really interested in an in-depth and very helpful look on affirmative action, you can read When Affirmative Action Was White by Ira Katznelson. This is a phenomenal book. I highly recommend it. An Untold History of Racial Inequality in 20th Century America. It does a great job. I'm going to be referencing a lot of quotes and a lot of the work in this book, but you should just read the entire book if you're interested in if you're a historical person and you're really interested in the in-depth look of this. I can't recommend this book enough. So I will not be just verbatim explaining to you Katznelson's argument for I will not be, not that really the argument, but I won't be just going through this book. I'm going to be kind of taking bits and pieces of that history to kind of just give you a context that you may not have about affirmative action policies. And then we're going to talk more about kind of the debate around it. So that's really what we're getting into today. Our check-in question. I'm sorry I don't have a better themed check-in question. If you haven't noticed, I try to theme them to the topic, but today was just, the plans were not planning, okay? As is evident by the fact that I have to take my chicken out of the oven in 5 minutes. The plans were just not planning today, so the icebreaker is really just tell me where you're watching from, because I really want to know. By the way, if you're watching this not live, if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, you can also leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I want to know. I want to see it. I read your comments, and I enjoy knowing that I'm not alone in the void. So please, if you can, just leave a comment. You don't have to give me your address or anything. Just a city, general city, state, country. I'll take it. And yeah, as I said before, I'm Grace Goober. I am an organizer at the Redress Movement. I do this every other Thursday. So yeah, let's kind of get into it. Let's just say you are coming to me and you are like, Grace, I have no idea what you're talking about because you just said affirmative action and I have no idea what that is. I hear you. So affirmative action. So in this context of if you're talking about allocating resources of employment, which is, allocate the allocation of resources or of employment or opportunities in that way. Affirmative action is the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to groups that have been discriminated against previously. I'm going to say that one more time. Affirmative action is the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to groups known to have been discriminated against previously. In other words, it is a remedy or a restorative policy for harms that have been done based off of race by the government. So the premise is you would use an affirmative action policy when you can recognize, hey, this group has been harmed. They've had things taken away from them by government policies. So we are now going to create a policy to give something back to them because we want to remedy's not quite the right word, but we want to start to repair that harm that was actively done against them. So I think when we're talking about affirmative action, I think it's really important. I think maybe a lot of people don't understand, they just know the first part of that definition, right? Affirmative action is the practice or policy of favoring individuals belonging to certain groups, right? And I think that's when you can start to fall into this, well, isn't that also prejudice or racism or reverse racism in some cases? But you really need to have that second part, that historical context, to understand why this policy is in place, right? And so today that's what we're going to talk about mostly. That's what we're going to spend the majority of the day talking about is what that harm was that then justified affirmative action. And I'm going to be, I can't say it enough. I am not a historian of affirmative action. I will be glazing over some things that are very complicated. I really just I'm just here to give you a little bit, okay? I'm giving you the Spark Notes, okay? And if you've ever read Spark Notes Shakespeare where they literally translate it, you will know it does not always capture it perfectly. And so please just bear with me. We're here, we're learning this together, I think. So anyway, So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about what that harm was. So affirmative action as a term kind of came to exist in 1935 with the Wagner Act. That was a federal law that gave workers the right to form and join unions. It later kind of became more closely linked with this like racial equity under JFK. But in the 1930s, so you had kind of the Wagner Act, and then you had the Roosevelt's New Deal, right? Now, Roosevelt's New Deal, in particular, did not include under that opportunities for many, it specifically didn't cover a lot of occupations that were held by Black people or people of color during that time. So the reason for that, again, I just want to point you here because it's an entire chapter, and but it's basically because there was feeling among the Democratic Party that they could not get Southern Democrats on board with the New Deal if it was also kind of taking this racial equity stance. So it was kind of a concession, and it would still provide some opportunities to people of color, and specifically to Black people, but it would ultimately provide more positive economic opportunities for whites than it would for Black people. A lot of people don't know that kind of history around the New Deal, and it is very contentious. I want to see if I can actually find really quickly. I say really quickly like you're not about to be here for a minute with me. I'll find the section that talked about it. Oh, not the timer. Okay. Give me 2 seconds. I'm so sorry. Someone just tuning in is just going to see like my couch. That's so embarrassing. Thank you. Just rest assured that your patience means that I will eat tonight, and that is all that matters. So anyway, so we're talking about the New Deal, right? So let's find a little section here. I have so many bookmarks in this book. Anyway, okay. So you had the New Deal, which wasn't. It mostly didn't include things like agriculture workers and also like domestic workers, and that was intentional to exclude Black people. So again, this is just one of those ways that Black people in particular were denied opportunities. And this is also, you have to remember, under Jim Crow. So like it also, like, later policies around the New Deal would become less about labor, and they would start to switch more to being about like, oh, is this trying to undermine Jim Crow? Well, we can't have that if it's going to undermine Jim Crow. So a lot of the contention around the New Deal became about, we want to make sure that we're not undermining Jim Crow, because if we, like, Northern Democrats would feel like if we started to undermine Jim Crow, we were going to lose Southern Democrats. So we had to maintain Jim Crow, but then also not like explicitly. And like just in order to pass this, right? See, now it's bothering me because I'm like, there's a line in here that's like, I'm so annoyed at myself. I reread these couple chapters like so many times in this book. So this is, yeah, okay. I found it. So this is, again, I'm reading from When Affirmative Action Was White. But it says, it makes no sense to write a retrospective morality tale condemning politicians and citizens who were imprisoned by Jim Crow. We should not imagine a freedom of action they did not have. During the New Deal, most liberals put other priorities well ahead of civil rights. And then further down it says, by not including the occupations which African Americans worked, and by organizing racist patterns of discriminations, of racist patterns of administration, New Deal policies for Social Security, social welfare, and labor market programs restricted black prospects while providing positive economic reinforcement for a majority of white citizens. This book kind of makes the argument like the administration at that time was largely just like trapped by Jim Crow. And so in order just to pass this to benefit most people and still provide something to African Americans, they really needed to, not make it something that could obstruct Jim Crow. So then we move on and that's like a big point in this book. The New Deal in particular is a big policy that they focus on because there's so many other policies that branch off it. So then you have what's more commonly known, or more commonly I think associated with the racial wealth gap, which is the GI Bill, right? So the GI Bill obviously came after World War II. So the thing is that with the GI Bill, and this is where it also ties to our work in housing segregation, the GI Bill did create a greater like middle class society, but again, it almost exclusively for white veterans, which is fascinating considering that it was called or referred to like as America's first colorblind social legislation. Because even though it didn't explicitly like say like this only applied to white veterans, in fact it didn't say that at all, and it seemed like on paper it could be a great equalizing force. Again, it was being restricted by Jim Crow and Southern Democrats, and there's a couple ways that this panned out. So first of all, you just had to remember that a lot of this, like the implementation of the GI Bill, was mainly left to states and localities, right? So what does that mean? That means in the places where there's already bigoted values and racist practices, that those are protected under this bill. Like, oh, you can continue to act the way you act, right? So this would mean that, black veterans returning home would face many obstacles to accessing these rights. Some were deeply entrenched in these places where they lived, and then there would also be new ones. And it would make it really difficult for them to have the same opportunities that white veterans had under the GI Bill. This in particular ties to housing segregation, our work, and the racial wealth gap, in that residential ownership, owning a home, is so foundational for establishing economic security, and for like it would be a huge part of why white middle class society and returning veterans would be able to kind of create generational wealth, essentially. And it's a big part of why you have such a widening wealth gap, which we still have. Like the ramifications of that, the exponential growth on that, that your great-great-grandparents were able to buy a home, meant that your great-grandparents had better security, and your grandparents had better security, and that really truly has built on itself, and we've seen that gap widen and widen over time, right? So that largely came down to kind of being like, well, the states and the localities, they can handle how they distribute these rights, which meant that if you were in a particular part of the country, that you could just limit those rights and have other obstacles in place. So then let's flash forward a little bit to the 60s and 1961, to be specific, when Kennedy issued Executive Order 10925, establishing the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity and requiring federal contractors to, quote unquote, take affirmative action to ensure that their applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. So this is, again, that kind of turn that I was talking about before, where now, like, Kennedy is using it specifically to talk about racial equity, and that's very explicit in this order. Lyndon B. Johnson takes this even further, and he really cemented that connection between the ideas of affirmative action and racial equity with his own more expansive order. I'm going to read, this time I marked down the page, good for me. I'm going to read a section. It's not that page. Is it that page? This is not the page I wanted. So yeah, and I'm not like trying to like gas up Lyndon B. Johnson here, but I am just saying he had quite a turnaround in his views on racial equity. Can I just find the It's hard also doing this with one hand. I really just want to say. I don't think I'm getting any credit. I'm doing this with my left hand. Of all things. Can I just... Oh. It's embarrassing if it was in the... I thought maybe it was in the preface and I was ignoring it. Hold on. Please stand by. That's why I don't consult the books, you know? I'm kidding. I'm so kidding. Please read books. Oh, here it is. It's so embarrassing because this is like this huge highlighted section. Anyway, so this is from a speech that Johnson gave at Howard University. So this is what he said. So at the heart of the speech lay Johnson's explanation of why civil rights initiatives were insufficient and why something more transcending equal treatment was needed. And this is what he had to say. You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying, now you are free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders as you please. You do not take a person who, for years, has been hobbled by chains and liberate them, bring them to the starting line of a race and say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Thus, it is not enough to just open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates. Declaring this to... It then goes on, this isn't... it says... Anyway. Declaring this to be, quote, the next and more profound stage of the battle for civil rights, the president shifted ground. We seek not just freedom, but opportunity. We seek not just legal equity, but human ability. Not just equal as a right and a theory, but equal as a fact and equality as a result. So the reason I wanted to read this quote is because he makes this point, like, we have to do something beyond just equal treatment. There is a restorative action that needs to be taken. There is justice that needs to be given. There are things we have taken away that now we have to give back. And I think that's a really important point. Hugh Davis, who is also quoted in this book, observes the president was announcing a theory justifying compensation for past racism that found its quote-unquote grounding not in the Constitution or statutes or in liberal tradition of equal treatment, rather the social forces that justified the new doctrine of race-conscious affirmative action was history itself in the form of past discrimination. So it wasn't... this is also really compelling, and it's again really what I wanted to like highlight here for those of you listening. If you've kind of just not known this about affirmative action, right? I loved this. Its grounding is not in the Constitution or in liberal tradition of equal treatment. It's rather saying it's addressing the harm that's been done, the opportunities that have been taken away, and now saying we should do something to give it back. So the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968 was also a turning point, with students pushing colleges to redouble their efforts to be more representative of American society. So you had kind of more like federal institutions that were becoming more representative, but Martin Luther King's assassination was really what made this also largely about college, which is still not... I feel like that's where like a lot of the conversation around it happens. It happens around college admissions. I don't feel like we hear it so much in employment, but even reading about some of the things that were discussed in the 5 hours of debate that the Supreme Court went through, a lot of it they're talking about colleges, which I think is fascinating. I don't really understand that, but like, let's go with it. I also just want to point out that we know there are huge benefits to affirmative action programs, not just because they do a better job at making more diverse classes, but then those diverse classes have benefits. So numerous studies have shown that student body diversity promotes learning outcomes and better prepares students for an increasingly diverse workforce and society, and better prepares them as professionals. Students who learn to interact with people of diverse backgrounds and experiences in college are more likely to succeed when they graduate into their chosen professions. there's also something I want to highlight here, which is that affirmative action, as it applies to schools and employment, it's a very complicated system. Usually, places are considering dozens of factors, right? So it's not that race is the determining factor. And it's not that there are quotas of how many people of each race we want in a class. And it also doesn't mean that it will push a mediocre applicant into a pool of admitted students. It means that it may serve as a tiebreaker between students with similar records, all of whom are likely to thrive at any particular university. I think that for the most part, this really only, like, I don't feel like people have this debate around, like, state schools. Like, no offense to state schools, but it's just the schools that have, like, higher acceptance rates. I don't think people really make such a, like, affirmative action doesn't get this, like, pushback as it does in the higher level universities and colleges. So what I kind of want to preface that with is that when you're talking about these higher level colleges and universities, there could be a candidate who, by all accounts of their academic achievements, their intelligence, their passion, their whatever, they could thrive at a particular high-level university. However, they may not have had certain resources that could give them what I'm going to say are like resume boosting things that colleges might find really, easy signifiers for, like, oh, this person will do well here. I'll just give an example that's not to call anybody out. But did my school have that? I'm like, wait a second, did my school have something? Anyway, let's just say a great thing colleges and universities like to see, if you're applying to college, I'm so sorry, but they like to see that you were part of clubs or, like, after-school activities, right? So I knew a lot of people who would pick ones that were, sort of academically centered, right? Maybe not sports or something arts related, but something, academically connected, right? So they might pick something like Research and Debate Club or Model UN, something like that, right? And they may apply to an Ivy League university and be wanting to study politics. Makes sense. You would see that on their resume and say, makes sense that they were a part of Research and Debate Club and that now they want to go into politics at our Ivy League institution. Makes perfect sense. You may have another student who is also, academically high achieving, right? But their school may not have had a Model UN or a Research and Debate Club, right? So they didn't have that opportunity because their school was maybe underfunded, was maybe in a not great part of town, something like that, right? And so they didn't have that opportunity, right? But it's about not just taking those signifiers, which are often, resource opportunity based, and instead looking holistically at the person and then, factoring into account, right? Like, oh, you know what? I can, like, you might sit there and say, like, looking at the applicant, like, I wonder why they didn't do something like that. I wish they could have, like, you as the admissions person, you might say, I wish they had something like Model UN or Research and Debate on their resume. And then, you might be able to say, like, oh, you know what? Like, I can see a full picture, and I don't think it's this because this person didn't want to do that, right? I think maybe just they didn't have the opportunity to. I am simplifying this so down, right? And that's intentional. You can get into whole things about test scores, right? And I know a lot of schools are test optional nowadays. You don't have to submit SAT or ACT scores to colleges in a lot of cases. A lot of places still value if you do and will, weigh it in your application. But it's kind of like that too. It's like, well, it's just another way for us to get a picture of you. That was what my experience was applying to college, which was not that long ago, unfortunately. But my schools were mostly test optional. And what they told you was, if you want to submit it, it is helpful. Like, it just adds to the picture of who you are as an applicant. We're not gonna take any points off of you, and I think that's what they're trying to say, or that's the way I would explain affirmative action. It's not that let me just say it. It's not that if you're white, we're gonna take a point off, because what we're really looking for is people of color. It's that we're just going to understand people's applications better, right? And it just adds to the picture of who you are as an applicant, which just helps them understand who you are and if you're a good fit there, right? So all of that being said, the affirmative action debate kind of always breaks down into like two camps, okay? There's those who support affirmative action policies on the basis of the benefits of diversity and also sometimes the security from anti-discrimination lawsuits. That's just a very real point a lot of them make. I'm just saying. And then, so there's them. And then there's opponents who claim that such policies are trapped in racial divisions and are only bound to perpetuate them. I'm holding back. So the Supreme Court is basically poised to say that, or kind of trying to make it so colleges and universities can no longer take race into consideration in admissions programs. This decision could diminish the number of African American and Hispanic students in higher education. So, what some folks who are opposed to affirmative action are trying to put forth is they are trying to say, don't you have any quote-unquote race-neutral alternatives in order to achieve diversity? Justices Amy Coney Barrett, Samuel Alito, and Chief Justice John Roberts have repeatedly pushed lawyers for schools to think about building a class without taking race in a diverse class without taking race into consideration. Barrett pursued a line of questioning, suggesting that instead of quote-unquote checking a box, an applicant could use an essay to demonstrate personal characteristics about their diversity. This was like a weird little tidbit that I think, again, this is where I think we start missing the plot about affirmative action. So they kind of came to this understanding that's like, writing an essay about your race would be fine and wouldn't be the same as checking a box. Or no, I'm sorry. Writing an essay and being about your cultural experiences and being admitted would be fine as long as it was not an essay about your race. It was about your cultural experiences. I'm sorry. I'm not laughing. I'm so sorry. Okay. Here's where and even they kind of say like, we're maybe like getting a little too, like, we're getting in the weeds a little bit. But I'm like, what's the difference? Like, if and essays are another part of your college application where you really get to know a candidate and you really get to see something about who they are, right? And get a fuller picture of them. So you're saying it's fine if they talk about their cultural experiences, but not their experiences because of their race, which, your culture and your race aren't always exactly the same, but certainly your cultural experiences as an American are very shaped by your race. So I'm just really not sure, that's possible. And again, I don't, like, nobody's dumb. Like, I'm sorry. If I was just reading applications, I don't think I would be able to read applications about somebody's cultural experience and not know what race they are. Like, even if they didn't explicitly say it, I would kind of, I think I would have an idea, right? So if I can't not think that because this is my culture too, and I live in it and I have an understanding of the world around me. So I would certainly know, right, if somebody shared a cultural experience with me, right? And I may not understand why someone doesn't if I'm not really clear about, like, oh, that's because they're this person, right? And this is their life experience, right? They grew up in, I'm just going to give an example, they grew up in Flint, Michigan, right? And they're a person of color. Their experience is very different than me, a white woman from New Jersey. So I'm just like, why does it matter? And I also think we have to get back to something that was kind of said before, which is that it's like, if the concern is creating race-neutral alternatives, if the ask is for race, if you want to create diversity, we have to talk about people's races. I think they're making, like, I almost want to say they're kind of drawing a parallel to things I've seen done with, like, with with gender. And, one of the things I think about is like, I remember there was this orchestra that was doing auditions, and they found that they were predominantly getting they were mostly male. And so what they started doing was they started having blind auditions where candidates would just come in and play. They wouldn't say a word. They didn't get their names beforehand. They would just play. And then they would rank them. And then they would, after the fact, decide who to admit based on those auditions. And they found they were getting more women were getting positions in this orchestra because of this blind audition. So, people's own biases were being filtered out. But the same is not true here, because we're only seeing a piece of paper that represents people. And on that piece of paper, there are so many other systems that have created the things on that paper, right? That if we're not taking their race into account, we get a very different picture of who they are, right? So, I think, you're taking out, you're never going to be benefited by getting less information about the person, right? And about the applicant and the candidate, right? Why not have that full, there are no quotas that schools are trying to reach. I said this before. There's no quotas. There's no, what we have to have this many people who are like this and this many people who are like this. So, why not take it into account, right? Especially because if you're open and candid about it and saying, hey, we do have this affirmative action policy, as was kind of said before, it does, prevent you, not fully, but it does help, protect you from discrimination lawsuits, right? So, I think I saw how much they were getting into the weeds about this whole, well, you could write an essay about your cultural experiences, but not about your racial cultural experience. Like, what are we even talking about at this point, right? I thought Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said it really well, which she said, I thought that part of what it means to be an American and to believe in American pluralism is that actually our institutions, are reflective of who we are as people in all of our variety, right? So I think it's just really, again, what we're getting lost in here is I'm seeing the Supreme Court fall into, as I talked about before in the definition of affirmative action, right? They're falling into that you're favoring some people over others. And, in truth, it's like, well, not quite. And also the groups that we are favoring, it's for a good reason. It's because we have harmed them, right? And we have discriminated against them, and we have taken things away from them that have put them at a disadvantage, right? And now we are saying we should do something to level that out. We should actively pursue leveling that out. So I'm going to take just a quick break one more time, just in case you're tuning in late to the party. A lot of this is coming from, again, I'm just going to shamelessly plug When Affirmative Action Was White by Ira Katz-Nelson. Don't be deterred that this book, I think, was published in 2006. It's really a great book. I wish they would do an update of it. You can see my copy is beat up. Can you see that on the spine? I haven't even had this book that long. But it's a really great book. It really goes in depth about this. It makes a very compelling case. And it really is in depth historically. So I highly recommend it. Is my laptop about to die? It is. Give me 1 second. Just so many interruptions today. I can't even. And it's not even my street. It's just me. Usually I do a culture break. I am not doing a culture break today. Again, I'm sorry. the planning was not planning. And I really I didn't find a good meme to show you today. And I'm so sorry. I thought about being should we draw some should we do a fun exercise? I was like, no, I just couldn't think of one. And so I'm really sorry. Okay. I'm gonna take a hot second to drink some water, and then we will continue on because we're almost done. We just have kind of a couple more things. I don't want to get into the tea of what some of these justices said, but I was really annoyed. I can say this, right? I'm like, can I say this? I could say, okay, you know what, I'll say it this way. I was very disappointed when I read from Clarence Thomas when he said, I've heard the word, during this whole session, he said, I've heard the word diversity quite a few times, and I don't have a clue what it means. It seems to mean everything for everyone. I was very disappointed when I read that. Let me just say that. Let me keep it. I was very disappointed because what do you mean you don't, like, I'm really trying to be like very professional about the way I'm saying this. But what I want to say is, what do you mean you don't know what it means? Like, you're a Supreme Court justice. You are much smarter than me to be a Supreme Court justice. Like, what do you mean you don't know what it means? And also, like, it seems to mean everything for everyone. I'm like, I don't even really understand what the implication is there. Like, are some people more deserving than others? With, like, it's just too vague. And I was like, this just feels kind of like snarky, and I didn't appreciate that. And not that I think Justice Clarence Thomas is watching this, but I just wanted to say that was disappointing to me. Don't joke with me. Anyway, so going back to what we were saying before, Justice John Roberts said the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. Or he wrote that once. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor later used these words against his position and said the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination. She said this in 2014. I so appreciate the nuance of that statement. So I'm just going to read it again for you. I wish I had made slides with some of these quotes. If you're a visual person, I am so sorry. Noted for next time. So she said in 2014, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination. I love this because this goes back to what I was saying before, right? And I've kind of been talking about this whole idea. It's what I quoted before from Hugh Davis. It's that race-conscious affirmative action. It was history itself that justified its existence, right? And so she's again saying it's applying the Constitution with this historical context, which is why it is so necessary, right? And the only way when you don't explicitly, and I think this is what you see even going all the way back to the New Deal, right? Or going back to the GI Bill, forgive me. It wasn't that it was race neutral, and therefore that allowed for it to actually be discriminatory, right? Because it was not explicitly anti-racist. It was not explicit in like, you have to provide, and you have to consider race, because if we say, oh, you can just not consider race, we know how that's going to pan out, right? What affirmative action isn't is it's not trying to solve discrimination with more discrimination, right? There are so many factors, as I've said, to consider when viewing someone as an applicant. And really, our society is not colorblind, right? The differing conditions people face based on their race do not go away when they apply to college. And our history is not race neutral. So why should why should our processes act like everybody's on a level playing field and therefore we don't need to consider race? So in kind of closing, because I know I'm getting close to my time. Good thing I didn't do a culture break. I think for you watching this, if you are, just thinking about the affirmative action debate, I think this comes down to, what do we value? If we value equal opportunities, if we value that anyone, no matter your race, can achieve what you aspire to achieve, if we value having institutions that look like our population in our country, and if we acknowledge that racist policies have existed and have done harm, and that harm is having a ripple effect and needs to be remedied, then there is no question in supporting affirmative action. By contrast, if you don't value those things, but you value that groups of people who you in particular like, because maybe they look like you, or, you know, that they don't have any competition, they don't have any new competition now entering the ring, even though they have a lot of opportunities given to them and offered to them, and they already have a better chance of getting into certain schools or getting certain jobs. And if you're in denial that Black people and people of color have been denied those opportunities, then yeah, I guess you don't support affirmative action, right? I think it comes down to, again, and I'm glad I started with this definition, you know, do you know your history or do you not, right? Do you understand the intended, well, actually, I feel very confident that, well, I shouldn't say that. I really hope that our Supreme Court justices are aware of the harms that have been done by government policies to Black people in this country. But for you, you know, you may not have known that, right? So if you understand that the intended purpose behind affirmative action was to right wrongs that have been done and are still having a negative effect on current generations, then there is no question that you know, would want to support a policy like affirmative action. And if you feel that way, you may also feel that way about housing. So, it was a shameless plug. It was such a shameless plug. But the same thing applies for housing, and the same thing applies for segregation. And so if you're interested in that, well, welcome to the Redress Movement. I'm so happy you found us. Usually I talk more about housing, but I felt like talking about affirmative action because it's tangentially related. And we fully believe here at the Redress Movement that you need to know this history in order to rectify it. So that's a lot of what we do. There's a ton of resources on our website that you can look up. If you are in Denver, if you are in Charlotte, if you are in Milwaukee, definitely go on our website because we have story maps outlining the history of racial segregation in those 3 cities. And if you're not in one of those 3 cities, even better for you, we have things like our Citizens Guide and different resources to help you start understanding how your city or town became the way that it is. And I encourage you to look that up. There's also videos on our YouTube channel of me doing that with my own hometown if you want some help. So feel free to look up those. Otherwise, you can follow us on our social media platforms just to see what other kind of things we're up to. And I said this before, but I'll say it again. If you want to email us, you can email hello@redressmovement.org. And you'll be in contact with one of my digital organizers. And we'd love to talk to you if you're interested in starting this kind of work in your city or town where you live. Especially if you have a book club, and if you found us through The Color of Law, definitely give us a shout out. Definitely find us, email us. Sorry, it's not switched, like the monitor. Anyway, you could definitely reach out to us at hello@theredressmovement.org. My name is Grace. I'm one of the digital organizers here at the Redress Movement. I do this stream every other Thursday at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, whether anyone's here or not. So you might as well come join me and hang out. We have a good time. Someone could actually answer my Q&A live, which would be really fun, and I would enjoy it. So if you don't want me to be lonely, you can come join me every other Thursday. You can also sign up for our mailing list on our website, redressmovement.org, and get emails about all the fun things that we're doing, including when we release things like policy briefs from our research team, who are super amazing, or get email reminders about things like this happening. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in or for watching after the fact. I do appreciate it. Leave a comment and let me know anything. Let me know anything. Did you learn something? What is your thoughts on affirmative action? Or you can answer my icebreaker question. I would be happy with anything. That is all I have for you. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.